This is the first video attached to the September 25th remote session. This week is going to be entirely about the visualization and the presentation of data. If the last 2 weeks saw us learning geography and information and how we combine them, this would sort of close that by putting them together and demonstrating and visualizing the outcome in both static maps and content that is a bit more dynamic and hosted online. So for this week, we'll start in Pro, cover some intermediate and advanced topics in symbology and layering, and we'll eventually graduate up to the integration with ArcGIS Online. So the first video, I'm going to cover point-based symbology. So what I've dragged in here is the home sales College Park, which is just a series of home sales tracked from multiple data sets over the last 2 to 3 years in College Park, which is a college town, where the University of Maryland is, not too far outside of the DC Center City. And as we reviewed in previous videos, a point is just a marker, right? The purpose of a point is to say, I'm here, this occurred here, and primarily to share its information. And therefore, symbology, which is how you take what's stored in the information in the attribute table, and I'll open that just to see here, and visualize that, is especially important for point-based data. And there's a lot of sort of garbage fields here we won't use because this put together multiple data sets. But if you're choosing to follow along, we'll probably play around with this last field here called price, which is a pretty standard field that looks at the price. And we may do a little bit with this one called type, although I'm not sure what type went. Yeah, type, which here gives me type 1, gives me sort of most of the homes, if not all of them, that I can sort of visualize. And right now, anytime you share a point, right, the first thing you're going to see is really sort of nothing here. And it's only when you come up to this ribbon here, appearance, labeling, and data, that you can begin to change the visualization of what you're seeing and use the attributes to help you. If you don't really care about the attributes and all you want is a point to demonstrate where you are, you can change that in 2 ways. You could easily right-click the point here and just change its color if you need something maybe to stand out a bit more. Or you could click on it. Double-click. And a map will come up. And what this means and what this is telling you is, hey, what symbol do you want, right? That's the first thing it's going to ask you when it says gallery. Tell me sort of the symbol. And these are the basic ones that will show up. There's a number of different ones you can explore here. I'm sure if I were to find a house, I'm being a little lazy, there it is, a house, right? Because these are home sales, I could select that label, and they would show up like houses here. There's more styles here. You can sort of load all styles if you want, but this is a pretty good start of giving you sort of a rough cross-section of what you might want to choose. And then once you pick something, whether it's a dot, a point, if you go to properties, that's where you can start to change its actual color and its scale and its size. Perhaps indeed I wanted this to be a bit smaller, and perhaps I did like that red. I don't want it to be sort of the brown house. I'd go here and hit apply, and it would set itself up. That's the basic. However, if you highlight it and come up to appearance, and you come to symbology, you'll see when looking at points, and this will also be true for polygons, which will have their own video next, you do have a number of different options that allow you to get a little more advanced. And we'll review some of those now. That's what we just did. That's the other way you can get to that same place. Unique values is typically using categorical or text-based fields. Type would be a good example of this. we could use this and call out all the different types of houses and give them a different symbol. That's a very common use of symbology in ArcGIS. Then we'll do a couple of these. Quantity, meaning a numerical value, a field that is integer, double, or float, so that I would actually see the gradation. And maybe this is what we'll do to demonstrate a different color for a different sail size, or even a different sort of symbol, or sort of a size. And then finally, something that we'll learn analytically later in the semester, you can quickly visualize a heat map using ArcPro, which is really just what it sounds like, looking at clusters of intensity. So in this instance, it wouldn't really tell us much about the value of the homes, but it would show you if there are places in College Park where there's a higher concentration of recent home sales or not. So let's do the unique value first. Immediately it's going to pause because ArcGIS or ArcPro or whatever software is always going to default to something. And that's the most important point here. It's defaulting to the field object ID, right? There's nothing in that field, so there's no sort of values. You need to tell it what you want, right? So this is where we would come down and maybe find that type 1 field. And typically it'll load itself. But if it wasn't loading, you could come up to this little icon right here, add all fields, and it would start adding each one. Now there's a couple more things you can sort of do here. For example, perhaps I wanted all of them to grow at the same size, right? I could come to more, and I could do things like, hey, I want to format all of my symbols. And I want to do that by maybe growing them to like an 8 and giving them sort of no, should not have done that. Let me redo that. Growing all of them to like 10. Halo is sort of the thing around them, and maybe I'll come and say there's no halo symbol. Should theoretically have a way to mess with the boundary, but I'm not seeing it. So maybe a little bit more exploring. But at least here I'll leave the color differentiation the same. I'm really just sort of changing the size. And right, they'd all grow sort of accordingly. So there's ways to change the properties of all of them without identifying or sort of screwing up the individual ones. But you also can mess with the individual, right? So you could right-click it and change the color, or you could just click on it, and now you'd be only focusing on this one right here. And I could come to gallery, and I could scroll down because this is an apartment, and make it a hospital because what the hell, I don't really care. And there it is. Now the ones that were sort of apartments that sold, and I'm not sure how many will pop up. There's one, will turn out being a heart. And I could come back and do the same thing with sort of the single families, which there are more of, and maybe this is where I'll link down and find that house. Right, it's up to you. The point is you are using the categorical values to determine what the breaks should be, right, where they should start differentiating the homes. So it looks like there must have been a word misspelled there by me by accident. So single family, right, this one had a space in front, and this one didn't, so it looks like they're two different ones. That's why it didn't sort of change there. But yeah, you're using the categorical values to change the value, and you can go in and individually sort of color up and change the points as needed. So that is unique value, and you can do as many as you want, right? If you want to start doing like type and then has bathroom, right? Maybe in anything that has a bathroom or has 2 bathrooms is green, and anything that isn't is red. You can do that too, right? You can add as many fields and build them on top of each other as you want. But these ones here are really where you start to use the numerical values. And I'll use colors to just show you what I mean. I think colors is much better used for the polygons that we'll show next. But what a graduated color map is effectively one that takes the value of something and then breaks down different colors by ranges. So that means there's one critical element we have to talk about, and it is right here, this concept of method. Now, what I want to do is, because method is, sort of an important concept, I'm going to devote a whole 4 or 5 minute video to it. So for right now, when you're testing this out, you can just leave it at natural break so we can sort of visually see how it's breaking down. But I do want you to be asking yourself that question, well, how the heck did you determine the value breaks that you did? Right? So if I come over here and pick price that I'd want to visualize, what I should be asking myself is, who said, right, that 246,500 and below should be the light pink, and who said that greater than 640,000 should be the red? That's sort of critical, that you should absolutely ask yourself the breakdown, because this is how it's really easy to lie with maps. So again, next video, I'll talk a little bit about the methods, because I think they need their own sort of time. But this is where you can just sort of come in and assign your own color scheme to it. My opinion, not the best with points. I think points are going to be better with the next thing I show you, using sort of size to graduate. But the concept here really is just that you're using an integer or a numerical based value, and you're scaling it by some degree, and you are assigning a color. So hold off. We'll talk about sort of the breaks and such in a second. I just wanted to give you a sense of what that is. You could also come to a graduated symbol. So this would be the same principle, except the size is sort of changing. And this is a much better way to visualize point-based data, in my opinion. Right, I'll go back to price again. And now you can sort of see the breakdown here from the cheapest houses to sort of the most expensive, and it jumps out, I think, a little bit easier than some of the others. It's much easier to sort of see the differentiation and the breakdown here. And you can come in here too and start changing these symbols, right? You can change the color of them. Maybe I'll make you a red. And you could change the base size. If I wanted the smaller one to be really, really tiny and the larger one to be really, really big, you can control it here. But again, that concept that I'm scaling between, setting these breaks by the home sale price and then categorizing each of the numbers individually, right? So if I were to click on this one here, right, which isn't the biggest, that's going to show me it's got to be a number between 1.2 million less than 1.2 million, right? And there it is. It's like roughly right at 1.2 million, versus if I'm going to click one of these, it's going to have to be something between that 1.2 and 6.4. And there it is, right? 3.569 million is the home right there. Proportional symbol actually stretches based on the smallest value and the largest. So in this one, right, if right now it's doing object ID, which is not what I would want, because object ID is a meaningless field. But if I do price, it's effectively saying if the lowest price I found here was X, or Y, this is how much bigger these other homes would be, right? And this is a rare kind of outlier home here, right? It's 6,400 and or 6.4 million, right? It's sort of way too big, and we don't really want it, and it sort of screws up the proportion like this. So anytime you do proportions, I find it's actually a really good idea to mess with the data in such a way that you are excluding outliers. And there's sort of a couple ways to do it. I think the best way, will allow me to teach another thing too, would be to come here to properties, come to definition query, and we're going to return to this again during select. So I'm going to go through this really quick. But this is a way to sort of visualize your data and exclude things. So I can come here to price, and maybe I'm going to just say, hey, look, price needs to be less than or equal to, and I'll say 2 million. So I'll exclude that $3 million home, 2, 3, and that $6 million home. And really, should it work, it'll take those sort of big ones away, and it'll re-stretch my sort of scale here. And really all I did here was kind of take that outlier out. So now I have a little bit sort of better of a scaled visualization between my lowest and my largest ones. And I can start to change the maximum and minimum size accordingly to sort of meet that criteria. The last one that I want to show you is heat map. And we won't dive too deep into this because we will analytically discuss how you create a raster that looks like this. But if you just want to quickly and visually convey a point, right, which is anywhere that it is a yellow or orange color, there are more home sales concentrating, and anywhere it is a blue, there aren't. This is how you would sort of do it. And you can change it in this way. The smaller the radius, the more it's going to really focus in on like really tight clusters, right? So if I make that 40, then it's going to sort of start merging this together. It's going to be showing me sort of concentrations over a larger area, right? So big neighborhoods, perhaps, where there's a lot of home sales, versus if I were to drop that radius down to 10, or even 15 or something like that, it's even going to further condense in on that one spot here, right, where there's a ton of home sales that occurred. And you're going to see a lot more sparseness because I'm trying to measure this at a more exact concentration. So again, just visual, just a way to sort of, convey concentration of data. But, no need to get too deep into this analytically because we will spend a future week really diving into this one.